In this topic, I want to discuss employee benefit plan tips. And this is meant for the individual that has multiple years out from retirement, maybe a couple of decades, they're in their 30s, 40s. They want to understand how to create a proper wealth accumulation strategy. And then also for the opposite side of the coin, the individual that's nearing retirement, they might be currently retired, and they want to know how to properly leverage their employer plans, their qualified pre-tax employer-sponsored retirement plans, such as a 401k, a 403b, a 457 plan, thrift savings plan, or even on the Roth side of that. So a Roth 401k, Roth 403b, et cetera, to really understand what those differences are and then how somebody could leverage those chips the correct way to make sure that they're maximizing some sort of strategy. So whether you're a long ways out from retirement, it's always important to have some sort of strategy to take these small little incremental steps, leverage the power of compound interest so that it's going to use a lot less effort to get to that final result. And same thing, after you've accumulated your dollars and now you're more towards a wealth preservation distribution strategy because you're older, you can't take on that much risk. And now you want to make sure that you're creating these different mechanisms for income, for emergency needs, for growth related needs or consistent growth or maybe death benefit needs, whatever that case is. So really the whole gamut of what an individual could do if they're offered an employer-sponsored retirement plan. So the most common type of employer-sponsored retirement plan is something called a defined contribution plan. And that's exactly what it means. So don't get hung up on the word, on the verbiage of it, but basically you're defining what your contribution is. So the employer saying, hey, we have basically this plan available for you. If you want to contribute, these are kind of the criteria in order to contribute. And then we might incentivize you to place more dollars in there off of something called a match. So if we think of this sort of bucket like any sort of bucket, or we think of this sort of account like any sort of bucket, the way and how this bucket grows is by the contribution somebody's placing into the plan and the rate of return that's coming back. So if let's say somebody's working for their employer, let's say for really easy math, they're making $100,000 in a given year, and the employer says, okay, we'll match you up to 5% of your contributions into your 401k account. So in this case, if let's say the person puts $5,000, which is 5% of 100 grand of their income, they place that in there and the employer would also match them that $5,000. So the individual put in 5,000, the employer put in 5,000. So now you have 10,000 that's ultimately going into the contribution side for that year. If they're doing this for multiple years, obviously that's adding further and further positives into their bucket. Let's say they did not add any contributions into their plan, well, then they have no dollars in that sort of plan. So this is ultimately the controllables, what you can control with how much you're placing into that plan. So that's one side of the coin. This is basically the fuel that's generating the fire. Now, the other side of the coin is the rate of return. And this rate of return is based on the different investment options that someone could choose. So typically with a 401k account, they might say, okay, you have these 15 to 25 options to choose. Based on how you allocate your investment opportunities, you could either, if let's say you're super aggressive, well, then you might have a higher tilt towards stocks or towards equities. If let's say you're more conservative, you might have a higher tilt towards, fixed income, bonds, or stable value funds, something that would just kind of generate a measly rate of return, but at least not lose value. So there's different ways on how somebody could allocate that properly. So if somebody was very aggressive, and let's say that the market did well, and they were tied to their account growth was tied to the market, well, then they'd be adding positives to this bucket. You would have the positives from the contributions the person's making, and if the market went up, then they would also be adding positives to this bucket. So you ultimately have the power of compound interest that keeps growing that bucket, making that bucket fatter. Now, on the opposite side, if let's say they have it leveraged towards investments and those investments go down, it didn't matter how much the individual contributed. If this rate of return comes back negative, it's equivalent to someone taking a sword and slicing that bucket. It could be a small slice, it could be a large slice. It really depends on what's going on with the market at that time. So this is why when somebody has a long time horizon from when their ideal retirement date is, let's say somebody's 30 years old and that's their point A, and they want to retire, their point B is age 60, well, they have a 30-year time horizon. So typically what happens with the market, historically what's happened with the market is the market's going to ebb and flow. So it might look like something like this where you have some sort of upward trajectory, but you might have these little low points along the way. This is why it's important, and this is where you have like risk tolerance and where you have to really match up what your goals are, is because you don't want to be taking on, or typically it's not wise for an individual to be taking on so much risk. If let's say they're age 59 and they're still 100% in the stock market, and the stocks are volatile and they could drop down, they could drop into a minus 20, minus 30, minus 40% drop right before that person retires, that could be a lifestyle change. So this is where an individual, when they're younger and they have that longer time horizon, they're trying to accumulate their wealth. They're trying to create a wealth accumulation, max out what their 401k is, or whatever their employer-sponsored plan is, make sure that they're getting the match properly, and then they're making sure that they're tweaking the allocations as per what their risk tolerance is, so that if they want to be more aggressive, they subconsciously like the risk, and they like the market, and they're more risk tolerant, well, then they could be more aggressive. If let's say they're more risk averse, they're more scared of the market, well, then it should correlate to their mindset and be more conservative. So as somebody starts chugging away and they start nearing closer to that retirement date, that's where individuals typically start to reduce their risk and start to go more into the fixed income. So this is why I've ever heard the like target date funds as an example. It's ultimately doing that mechanism for an individual. Now, the good thing about 401k or employer-sponsored plan is typically there is some sort of match on a defined contribution plan. So typically a 401k would be, if it's set up through a private institution, a 403b could be a state institution, 457 could be some sort of municipality, a thrift savings plan could be the federal government. Then there's a whole slew of other types of defined contribution plans or employer-sponsored plans. Now, all of these kind of correlate to having maybe some sort of match. And that's where it's important to make sure that you're placing in what the match is actually giving you. You're able to take advantage of what that match is. And the verbiage of the match can be a little bit tricky. You might see something where it says, okay, 100% up to 5%, or you might say 50% up to 5%. So the difference between that two slew of verbiage is, with a 50% up to 5%, if let's say somebody's making $100,000 and they decide to put in $5,000 into their 401k account, the employer would match them $2,500. If let's say they put in $10,000, their employer would match them only $2,500 because it's 50% up to that 5% marker. So as long as whatever they're putting in up to that 5%, that's going to be the most that the employer will basically match up to. So this is where you might hear like, okay, 100% up to 3%, 100% up to 2%. So that just means that whatever your salary is and you're placing that contribution into your employer-sponsored plan, your employer is incentivizing you to stay with the company, to stay with that employer benefits package, so that you could, obviously take advantage of what that match is. The downside to these defined contribution plans is really that secondary side, that rate of return side. Because like I mentioned before, there's only about 15 to 25 different options, or think of them as eggs in your basket, to choose. If you have a specific growth strategy or a specific conservative strategy, or really whatever your mechanism is that you're trying to accomplish your goal on, there's only so much juice that you could squeeze out of those investment options. So this is why it's wise to take advantage of what the match is, what the employer match, but it might make more sense to not put a dollar over what the match is, and then add your dollars if you have further contributions. So like as an example, let's say somebody makes $100,000 in a year, they're getting a 5% match, but they could allocate $10,000 or 10% of their salary towards some sort of retirement plan or retirement opportunities to accomplish their goal later on, throughout their retirement years. Well, maybe they'd want to take advantage of the match, put $5,000 in because they know they're getting $5,000 from the employer match, and then take the other $5,000 and place it into a different type of account, maybe an IRA account or a Roth IRA account, different things that could maybe be more tax appropriate for them and really leverage their chips a lot better way that's in correlation to what their goals are. So it's all about making sure that you're not just going into everything blindly, that you're taking these little baby steps to say, okay, what exactly is going to be the most mathematically appropriate route? How can I make sure that I'm leveraging things the correct way, using the correct tools in the correct areas, as opposed to just kind of getting suckered into, okay, I have these, 15 to 25 options. I'll just basically keep it there. And this is something that's very common when an individual leaves their employer. When somebody leaves their employer, and let's say they start working for a new employer, individuals typically leave that old, as an example, 401k, they'll just leave it with that old employer. So now their rate of return is still based on those measly, 15 to 25 options, where when they sever employment, that allows them, that qualifies them to take their old 401k and roll it over into an IRA. When it's in an IRA, you could customize it better. You could set up different income strategies. You could have, you might have anywhere between 4,000 to 5,000 different options, different strategies that you could leverage within an IRA account, as opposed to, just basically a growth strategy with the old 401k. So, this is where it's very important, if somebody is nearing retirement, they're eligible to do the rollover, how to make sure that they're rolling those dollars over properly into the IRA, or if they're still working for their employer, or maybe they're working for a new employer, how to make sure to leverage their old 401k monies, place into an IRA, and still leverage it towards that trajectory. Maybe they want to have growth, well, then make sure that the IRA is set up for growth as their new 401k is also set up for growth. And now that you have basically the two accounts versing each other to try to, and think of it, you just broke it up into two separate buckets, because the IRA could have 5,000 different investment choices versus the 401k would only have, about the 15 to 25. So that's where, it really just goes by flexibility, goes by control. And that's where, when somebody's no longer working for that employer, they have the opportunity to go and take those dollars at any point in life. It could be when they're in their 30s, in their 40s, or in their 60s, right before retirement. And at whatever stage you're at, and really what your goal is, that's where it's going to be most important to leverage those chips and make sure you're customizing it correctly or towards a specific strategy. So I hope that all of that makes sense. Now, the other type of employer-sponsored plan, which is really limited, you only have about 10-15% of individuals are offered a defined benefit plan. What's ultimately happening is the employer is defining what the person's benefit is. So this is where, if you ever hear the word pension, typically an employer that's working for a city, working for a state, they might be offered a pension plan. And what's happening is they're giving X amount of years of service to whatever that entity is. And then the entity is basically creating their retirement income stream on the back end. So if, let's say, they've worked for that company or they worked for that employer for 30 years, based on how many quarters of service, how much that they made, there's going to be some sort of calculation to say, okay, if let's say you hit age 62, you'll be able to receive X amount of dollars of lifetime income from the pension income stream. Maybe if it's you and your spouse, you could receive X amount of dollars as well. So maybe it might be, $70,000 for a single, and then it might be $50,000 for a joint, meaning if one spouse passes away, the second spouse will still be receiving income. So this is was very popular. And then employers understood that there was more of a risk on their books to really be setting up and creating these pension plans, because individuals are living longer, and they would rather go and obviously take that risk and throw it to the employee. So this is why a lot of defined contribution plans came about, and why employers use typically the defined contribution plans well over the pension opportunities. If somebody is offered a pension plan, that could be very favorable, or maybe they might be offered, a little bit of both. Like as an example, a thrift savings plan. If you have federal employees, they're offered some sort of pension plan. They're offered a thrift savings plan, which is a defined contribution plan. So the pension plan is a defined benefit plan. The thrift savings plan is a defined contribution plan. And then they could also have a Social Security supplement or Social Security income. So they basically have something called the three-legged stool, where you could utilize this for income. You could utilize this for income, and then the TSP could also be utilized for income, while whatever you don't use for the thrift savings plan towards that income strategy can now be left over for emergency needs and growth/inflationary needs. So it's very powerful when you kind of have all three of those mechanisms that you could use, based on your employee benefit plan. So these are the most common mistakes that individuals typically make when trying to use their employer benefit plans. And the first thing is putting too much money into the match. If, let's say, the match is only 2%, but then somebody's overfunded, they're putting 15% of their salary into the employer-sponsored plan, why are they doing that? They're basically adding 13% higher than really what the free money is. Maybe it might make more sense to just put the 2% into that employer plan and then take the other 13% and contribute that and make sure that it's spliced out evenly throughout, Roth IRA accounts, traditional IRA accounts, because of those investment options. The really good benefit of an employee benefit plan is typically that match. If you're not offered a match, or you're offered a small match, why would you place in more into those dollars into that plan if you know that the investment opportunity is more limited than you can, get on the personal side through like an IRA as an example? So that's where avoid the mistakes of placing too much money into the match. Understand what the match is, understand how that verbiage works of saying, 50% up to 10% or 50% up to 3%. Well, then put in whatever that mechanism is so you're getting the free money, and then you're making sure that you're allocating it properly as per what your risk tolerance is. And that's something we help out individuals. We help them understand what their employee benefit plan is, and then how to utilize the match, and then saying, hey, you know what, you're fine just leaving your dollars in that in that employee benefit plan and then, not contributing to other areas. Or maybe you might want to contribute to X, Y, and Z because the culmination of your employer benefit plan plus another income mechanism, plus a tertiary related account, plus your savings, all of these four main areas are going to work in tandem with one another so that when you do hit that point B, that ideal retirement date, you can now start to spit off income or create certain specific goals that will optimize your plan correctly. The other thing that a lot of individuals don't take advantage of because maybe they've been in the same employer plan and they've been leveraging a traditional 401k as an example, but they didn't read that there's a new Roth 401k that came about. So if somebody makes too much money, there's a specific cap limit that if they make too much money, they cannot contribute to something called a Roth IRA account. But there is no cap limit on how much money that you make on a Roth 401k account. So that's where an individual can go and take their monies, and even though they're not eligible on the individual side for a Roth IRA, they can take advantage of the Roth 401k and all those tax-free benefits of a Roth 401k. So that's where it is important to look and to really understand what are the pros and cons between a traditional 401k versus a Roth 401k, or traditional thrift savings plan versus a Roth thrift savings plan. And maybe you might want to mix and match and put a portion into the traditional because that will give you a tax deduction now, but then it'll be taxable money later on, versus the Roth, which would be no tax deduction now, but those monies will grow tax-free. You can pull your monies out tax-free. You don't have RMDs. Also, it's not included currently. It's not included in Social Security taxation, basically what that calculator works as. So there's a lot of really good advantages of the Roth where even if you make too much money, understand that you could take advantage of the Roth employee benefit plan, but not the Roth IRA account. So that's something that, individuals basically have in their pocket that they might not understand, that of what the advantages of those are over, traditional employer plans that don't have access to a Roth. The other thing I mentioned was limited investment options. So that's why it makes sense to obviously take those dollars and place them into IRAs when you are eligible. Eligibility typically on a rollover is when you sever employment. If let's say you hit a specific age-based in-service qualification, so maybe if somebody's age 59 and a half and they're still working for that employer, well, they might be eligible to take their monies from their 401k and roll it over into an IRA, even though they're still working there and they're going to be working there for the next 6 or 7 years. They could take advantage of that 401k, roll the monies over into an IRA or customized IRAs, and then have their new 401k plan start at zero and then contribute to it for the next 7 years before they retire again. So that now they have the 401k, they have the IRA that they already rolled over when they were 59 and a half. And now they have these two mechanisms working against each other so that when they retire, they can utilize the IRA for income. They can utilize the 401k for income. They can utilize Social Security for income, maybe a pension income. So there's, a whole slew of different ways to kind of skin that cat. But, that's where you really want to be, mindful if there are opportunities to be able to take the dollars and, stack it away into IRAs when eligible. Now, if let's say you're working there and you're not eligible, well, then you can't roll it over. It's not like you could just, go and take those 401k monies and roll it over whenever you want. You have to hit certain qualification points. And then really, most importantly, the biggest mistake is not having a plan. It's just what happens too often is an individual will go start working for a company. They'll start adding dollars into their employer sponsored plan and they just kind of set it and forget it. And they don't look at it and they don't utilize kind of the mathematics behind it to say, okay, I know that if I'm placing aside 10% of my salary every year, well, maybe I should only put in what the match is to my 401k and then use the other 5%, as an example to more personalized plans. And that's what we try to help individuals understand really what that math works and really how to create those customization opportunities, based on what their goals are. And lastly, just some really important tips to try to help somebody get structured if they wanted to try to do this on their own is understand which stage of the game you're in. Are you in an accumulation stage or are you in a preservation stage? So remember, when you're trying to accumulate, you're trying to take on more risk to get a higher potential rate of return, and understanding that your rate of return could ebb and flow based on what the performance is with the market. Or you're trying to preserve your accounts, or you're more, in your 50s where you want to retire in your early 60s. So how do you make sure that you're taking your buckets, you're preserving them so that they're not having any sorts of negatives? Maybe you're utilizing the proper rollover strategies to roll them over into IRAs and customize those plans properly, to get you to the finish line, to give you retirement success. And this is where the structure of the three-thing scenario comes in. There's three things that every individual needs to figure out before they're retired. If they're currently retired, how to stay retired forever. The number one thing is create an income strategy, because why would this be important? Well, when you're no longer working, you're no longer collecting a paycheck. So if you do not have an income strategy, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is you could burn through all of your assets. You could burn through all your buckets if you're not taking the correct steps, if you're not creating the correct strategy. Meaning that you could go back to work when you're in your 70s or 80s or significantly decrease your retirement lifestyle because you messed up on the stage one. So this is why I always say stage one is the most important. Stage two is emergency needs. And then stage three is growth/inflation. So the ultimate goal with any sort of retirement plan to be making sure that they're creating the proper income strategy, using the smallest amount of dollars only as much as necessary to do this so that they have their safety net in place. Whenever they use those dollars, the smallest amount only as much as necessary, now they can move on to step two, which is their emergency need. How much should they be placing in their emergency need? Whatever the smallest dollars is and only as much as necessary in their emergency need, now they have step three, which is their growth. And this is ultimately their fund monies. So the ultimate goal is to try to have as much money left over in step three. With step one, you want to create a budgeting analysis to say, okay, how much do I have in my monthly expenses? How much are my monthly expenses projected to be in retirement? Maybe you have a mortgage right now, but then when you hit retirement years, you're not going to have that mortgage. Or maybe you have some sort of idea that you want to travel the world, and maybe that's going to cost you more than what your current expenses are. So how do you make sure that you're staggering out properly? Maybe the first couple of years, first 5 years of retirement, you want to travel, but then after that, you're going to kind of slow it. So it goes by the go-go years, the slow-go years, and then the no-go years when, basically towards the end, when you're in your 80s, late 70s, where you know that you're not going to be traveling as much, but you still want to make sure that you have the proper amount of health care and you have everything is basically covered up properly. So this is where the income strategy is really the most important, and understanding how to utilize this is maybe looking at what Social Security income you're going to be generating, you and your spouse are going to be generating. If you guys have any pension income streams, what's the combination of these two? And then are these greater than or equal to your expenses? If they're not greater than or equal to your expenses, well, then you have to pull from your savings. And then you have to create strategies to say, okay, maybe somebody has $500,000 that's sitting in their 401k account or old IRA account, and it's only going to cost $200,000 to give them the proper safety net between the Social Security and the pension and this IRA that's going to produce some sort of income that would be greater than or equal to their expenses. So they know step one, regardless of however long they live, they will always have this income coming to them. They'll always have that safety net that's set up properly. The step two emergency rule of thumb is to leave about 6 to 12 months of what their expenses are, leave them to some sort of liquid account. So maybe out of this, they use $200,000 for step one income. Maybe they're going to use $50,000, put it in an IRA money market account. That's not going to really ebb and flow with the market. It's going to be very safe. Kind of think of it like a checking savings account that's sitting in an IRA chassis. So that could be step two. And so out of that, now they have $250,000 left over for their growth and really their fund monies. So maybe out of that $250,000, they could go and splice it up into, $100,000, be super aggressive with low cost ETFs, low cost, stocks, whatever that is. Maybe they could use $100,000, place it into some sort of protected growth strategy, and then the other $50,000 maybe put into some sort of fixed account so that they know that, regardless of whatever's happening with the market, they're always going to have some sort of fixed rate of return each year. Really, the protected growth strategies and the fixed accounts have been very popular in the last couple of months because the Fed has increased interest rates and had a trickle-down effect on these sorts of accounts. Some individuals are more risk tolerant and they just love the ebbs and flows of the market, and they can place that full amount of money into the market. Some individuals like to kind of pad it out a little bit better and diversify it a little bit better. So that's where you could kind of create, multiple mechanisms and have multiple strategies all working in tandem so that everything is covered properly. So I hope that all this makes sense. And really the three-thing scenario just gives you a baseline of how to accomplish it, and be happy and be satisfied throughout retirement. What makes us unique on a national basis is we have proprietary and trademark strategies, which basically takes the three-thing scenario and it's equivalent to putting the three-thing scenario on steroids. So we really go into the minutia. We look at each little area of it. We make sure to create different budgeting analysis and to say, okay, where can you go and add more dollars or pull from more dollars or whatever that case might be to make sure that everything is structured properly. So we call it, the trademark process is called the retirement diet plan, which focuses on your distribution strategy, your distribution income strategy, using the smallest dollars only as much as necessary, your investment related strategy for growth. We use something called the REEF method on that. estate planning, if let's say you want to leave, certain accounts, maximize certain accounts to beneficiaries, and then T, tax planning, making sure that you're creating the proper Roth conversion strategies. So how to make sure that this is really maximized, to the 10th degree. If you did find value in this video and you want to speak to a specialist, feel free to give our 1-800 number a call. It's 1-800-566-1002. Make sure to reference this video so we can assign the correct advisor to your schedule and have a conversation either through phone, through Zoom, face-to-face, really whatever's most important to you. And feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Retire Sharp, so you can have access to the most updated videos. Thanks so much, guys.